Welcome to Journeys of the Internationally Trained Lawyer, our podcast that follows the stories of lawyers around the world. I'm your host, Jumi Odepi, a corporate commercial lawyer in Ontario, and I have here with me Claudio Klaus. Claudio is a cross-border corporate lawyer and podcast host of Studying Law Around the World. I'll let Claudio introduce himself and we take it from there. Let's do this. Hi, Claudio. Thank you so much for being here. Hi. Thank you for being here to share your story with us. I'm really appreciative of that.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to be here with you, Jimmy.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. So, Claudio, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. What I really want to know, and I know what most viewers want to know, is what's your story? What has been the journey so far?
Absolutely. So as you said, well, I'm Claudio Klaus. I'm a corporate and commercial real estate lawyer. I have been practicing law or involved with law in general for quite a few years now. My professional journey has been now over a decade long. So I had the opportunity to start quite young while I was still doing my undergrad degree in a very legal setting with lots of people who were lawyers and who also mentored me and guided me into getting into law school and really were good influences for me to understand the legal field and all that comes with that, right? So I started my journey in Brazil, as you said, and that started in a notary office, in a land registry office. Those are public appointed people in Brazil, so there's a very specific process of how you can become a notary and a land registry officer. And to try and explain it just very briefly, basically you have to do multiple exams. It's a very complicated journey. It's basically just as hard as becoming a judge. So it's a very different experience than that of being, a notary in other countries, like in North America, where it's somewhat more simplified, that journey and that process. But in any case, I was just very lucky to have very good leaders and mentors from the get-go in my career, and just basically started from there. And then moving forward, a couple of years, went through law school, had a great experience. During law school, I was very interested in doing something international with my career, and I had the chance to ask a few people around, how do you make your career as international as possible? Had a few tips, had a few people who told me that it wasn't possible. But anyways, I marched on and was able to participate in quite a few different programs, exchange-wise, and also summer and winter schools in different countries. I had the chance to visit South Africa, Azerbaijan, and a few other countries as well. Had the opportunity to participate in conferences and seeing all of that, and meeting all these incredible people around the world. I realized that I had such a wealth of interesting contacts with such interesting stories that I wanted to do more than just keep those to myself. So prompted after, an exercise at one of our classes still in law school, I decided to start my podcast, and that's when Studying Law Around the World started. It started at first with me just asking people, how do you become licensed in your jurisdiction? How does the process work? Do you have to do an undergrad? Do you have to do a JD? Do you have a bar exam? All of that. But it quickly evolved to much more. I realized that really the richness was in people's stories and how they, went about building their careers, and how unique that can be to each individual. So all of that was really the start. Still during law school, I was able to participate in a few other opportunities that were international in their nature as well. I was able to be a research assistant to a teacher, or to a professor in the US, and then also to be legal extern for a judge in Arizona. So I had all these experiences that really broadened my horizons and showed me that a legal practice that is international in nature is actually possible. Even though, depending on the institution in which you study, you might not hear much about it, and then it might seem impossible because of that. Fast forward to, I want to say, 2024, I found myself in Canada, and here then I was ready to continue my career. Because of personal circumstances, I relocated to Canada and did the Masters of Law program at the University of Toronto. Had a great experience, was able to learn from a lot of people, and currently am a lawyer here, so I have fully qualified again, and and finished, bar exams, called to the bar, and all of that. This was supposed to be just a short introduction, but I think I told you a little bit about the main points of my life so far. So I'll just give you some space here to ask a couple of questions there.
Yeah, no, that was good. I like the way you gave us it was in that one thing that you said I'd like to ask is when you were working with lawyers or judges in Arizona, and were you still in Brazil or that was when you got to Canada?
Yeah, so I had a little bit of everything, to be honest. So I was able to work with a professor from Arizona as well. I was a research assistant, and that work was done entirely remotely. It was around November 2020, so it was, through the height of the pandemic. And then when I had the chance to, I say quote unquote work because it wasn't like a paid work contract, right? It was more of a learning experience, but being a legal extern at the Arizona Supreme Court. And that happened in early 2022, but that happened in person. So I was able to be in the country, to be in chambers, learning with the other clerks, with the other externs as well, and seeing the proceedings in person.
That's a huge experience right there. Huge. It's amazing how those little things come to really help you when you finally get requalified in Canada. Because I've had little pockets of experiences like that myself. Apart from Nigeria, then when I got to Canada, little experiences back here, going to court with a lawyer there, and eventually when I finally got called to the bar, it's just everything added up. So how was it starting over in Canada for you? Did you go straight to the bar to starting the bar exams and all of that? Or did you take a while and then getting into practice after call to bar? What was it like for you?
Yeah, so I'll backtrack a little bit. I try to summarize the story so I wouldn't take the whole podcast just telling you about how, about my life. But basically, what ended up happening is that back in 2022, I was finishing my law studies in Brazil, and one of my professors in the law school also taught the graduate programs. And he mentioned to me, he asked me how long it was going to take for me to finish my law degree, when I was taking the bar exams and all of that. And knowing of those timelines, he mentioned that there was an opportunity for me to start a master's program in the university if I was interested, and that considering how long I would be around for, it would sync up basically that I would be able to complete all my courses, and then I would just have to write my dissertation afterwards. So it made sense for me to kind of complete all of that together. It happened that while doing my master's, I realized that you have a lot more flexibility to be doing international things. So I was able to find an opportunity to be what is called an international visiting trainee at the university, at York University, which is the house of Osgoode Hall Law School. So I visited Canada for the second time. The first time I came as a tourist a couple years previous, and then visited Toronto now for the first time. And then I was studying at Osgoode, learning there, being a researcher there, learning with the graduate students, those who are pursuing a master's and PhDs at the university. And so got connected to the Brazil Canada Bar Association. And it was then that I learned a little more about, the possibility of becoming a lawyer here as well, and why people would look into this jurisdiction to practice, what are some of the main attractives of the jurisdiction as well. So putting all of that into consideration is what made me relocate for the long term. And that, again, it was back in 2022. And when I said personal circumstances, if I may disclose, I actually ended up meeting the person who's now my wife back then. So that's really one of the main reasons of moving out here, right? So after finishing that master's program, finishing my research at Osgoode, I returned to Brazil and then, continued my relationship. My wife eventually relocated to Brazil. We lived together there while I was clerking for a justice at the Court of Appeals in Brazil still. And then I was still junior enough in my career where it felt like it made the sense to do that move then. Back then, I was working for Duolingo in a remote contract, so I was able to relocate quite easily and finished my clerkship, came to Canada, still doing that work for Duolingo, and then started my master's at U of T.
Beautiful. So it wasn't like the typical progression. For most of us, we just, like for me, came into University of Ottawa to do my master's, then stayed in Canada, and for you had to go back to Brazil. You came back and then started the practice, and that's beautiful. And how has it been? in practice for you?
It has been a great experience for sure. I was very lucky to be in different environments that taught me a lot. So I first started working for a solo lawyer that allowed me to work while I was doing my master's. Just had a great experience all the way from learning corporate law, commercial agreements with him. I didn't have a lot of experience with litigation myself in my home jurisdiction, even though I clerked. I had never been the one in those files. So it was interesting to get also an opportunity to be exposed to, demand letters, preparing different legal documents that would be presented at court. And also, I produced a legal podcast for that law firm in the time being. So it was quite an interesting thing that allowed me, to mix together some of the things that I already knew and that I was already doing with this other, opportunity. And following that, I had the chance to summer at the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee, one of the offices of the Attorney General. So it was quite an interesting experience. This is an incredible organization that is part of this province. It takes care specifically of vulnerable persons. So there was a very interesting and dynamic area of practice there, I would say, all the way from trust, states, and charity law. But there was a lot of all the way from solicitor kind of work to very much a barrister kind of work. So I was able to work on drafting affidavits. I was able to work on appearing before the landlord and tenant board. I got the chance to appear before the small claims court. So all of that as a summer student. And then beyond that, I also was able to assist in a few cross-border state matters. So I was able to participating files where clients had assets abroad and had to bring had to sell those assets and bring them to Canada. So it was quite an interesting experience. Following that, I articled and am an associate at a firm that does transactional work. So I completed some rotations in corporate law and commercial real estate. I did quite a few not-for-profit law files as well. And it has been just incredible, both from the perspective of learning the work, learning the trade, but also getting the chance to meet a lot of very, very interesting people. Have been able to really enjoy that experience and meet, as I said, lots of great colleagues along the way.
Beautiful. It sounds almost as if you've been in practice for 15 years. The kind of, I'm talking of the breadth. You've done charity, you've done estates, you've done trusts, you've got a bit of taste on litigation, and then, of course, broadly in corporate commercial law. So that's really, really a blessing that you've had that. You've had mentors and coaches come along your way. That's really, really beautiful. I wanted to know, I know studying law around the world, it was Chad Abroad that told me first about it. When I was just starting this podcast, I never knew about it. And Chad said, do you know Claudio Klaus? And then, he did that introduction. And I see that you've reached over 100 episodes, if I'm correct. I've heard that. And that's really something. So you've mentioned why you started. What has the experience been getting lawyers to interview? Do you have something you look out for when you call, I'd like to interview you, this lawyer? And then I don't think studying law around the world is just for Canada. I think it's international, right? So what has that experience been for you as a lawyer interviewing people? What do you do? Just tell us a bit about studying law around the world and your other legal initiatives.
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I'm very grateful for Chad. He was one of the guests in the podcast, and so were you, of course. But he has been quite an interesting and I would say refreshing voice in the profession. So it's been very interesting to learn from him and to see what he says. So big shout out and grateful for him to mentioning me to you and make this connection. As far as the podcast goes, I briefly mentioned before how it started, but really the value of it has been really on getting to know people, getting to understand different trajectories and how people go about doing things in their own careers. I would say that one of the greatest satisfactions for me is getting the chance to go to different events and different initiatives that are happening in the legal profession around the world and meeting people face to face, those that I had first met only through the podcast. Some of the main points right now, you mentioned, you ask who I invite or how does that happen? What am I looking for? So yes, first, I have over 100 episodes now. Have just learned so much with so many different guests, but I'm always looking for people who follow different trajectories. So whether that be, the very quote unquote standard trajectory of going to law school, going into a firm, and kind of just climbing the ladder there, becoming a partner, and building their practice inside that firm, all the way to people who have gone through very, very varied career trajectories. I've spoken with a fair share of former lawyers as well that now do different things for their profession. I've talked with people who were lawyers, left the profession, did something else for a couple of years, became lawyers again. I've talked with people who, went in house, who became solo practitioners, who, built their own practice, and also people who helped lawyers to build their practices as a consultant or as a coach. So I think there's a really good variety of things, and I hope that the podcast can be, a really good resource for those who are looking into starting a career in law. I always try to focus on early career professionals, people who are looking into joining the profession and what they can really gain from it, not only from understanding what a lawyer does in the day to day, but really understanding the incredible possibilities that are given to those who join this profession. Just because there's really so many things you can do. And sometimes when you're, inside a group of people who only do the same thing, it really can become, it can seem like that's your voice, that's the only thing possible. But the more I have the chance to talk with people, the more I understand really the possibility and really breadth of this profession and of the practice that you can build depending on your personal desires, depending on what you get, even fortunate to be doing. So it's just been really a pleasure to conduct the podcast. And I'm sure that, as you do your project as well, it's been quite interesting to meet so many people, to do different things, and to really, understand how all of that happens here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned it, that law. Initially, my thoughts too about law was that you have to actually just go to courts. That was my thought. As a young lawyer, I'm talking about 20 years ago, 20 something years ago. Like you have to be a criminal law. Criminal law was my favorite course back in law school. So I was so sure I was going to become a criminal lawyer and there was no other thing, but when I got into practice and saw that criminal law wasn't going to do it for me and got into corporate law, I didn't realize that, wait, all the different types of law that it taught us in law school, you can actually be a lawyer in those areas, like almost each subject. You can be a tax lawyer, you can be an estate lawyer, you can be a nonprofit, it's the possibilities are endless with law. Whatever your passion is, you can gear it towards the profession. Like we are doing now, we're corporate lawyers, but then we have a podcast, and other initiatives, because I saw claudioklaus.com and I saw various, apart from studying law around the world, you had your research project, you have some projects coming up and all that, and you even speak in conference. I know you're speaking at the ITL conference coming up. So you're absolutely right. It's a profession where I wish I see each time, not I wish, each time I see younger lawyers who are probably confused about, this is what I like. I'm not sure I can do law. Like, look, if you love the law, whatever you like, you can fit it into the profession. And yeah. One other thing that I'm really interested in people's stories is, you came from somewhere, right? You came from Brazil. You've been from, what's the effect? Because I know for me, I came from Nigeria, and of course I had my parents in Nigeria. They do travel, but I have my aunts, I have my uncles, I have my friends. What was that like for you as a lawyer, leaving what you're used to and leaving family and coming here? What was it like? Do you keep in touch? Do you go back? And yeah, I just want to know that perspective.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I still have a lot of family back home in Brazil, and definitely, miss them, and make the point of going and visiting as frequently as possible. Of course, my main family is now here, right? Along with me, my wife, my daughter. But yeah, it's been, a journey in that sense. As I had mentioned, I did have quite a few experiences of living away from home growing up. So I was able to, spend time in the US, spend time in Europe. So it's not like it was my first time ever leaving the home, to do this, but it is, of course you learn how to deal with missing people, how to stay in touch and all of that. And of course now you have a whole new relationship to help and manage, which is, my parents and their granddaughter. So it's been quite a fun experience on being in the middle of that and seeing them becoming grandparents as well, and then seeing me become a parent, and see, her growing and all of that. But yes, definitely still keep ties with the country, still visit as often as possible, still keep ties as well in a business sense, to license in the country, and also, hoping that at some point in professionally I can build some kind of a Brazil desk or something along those lines, working with those corporations. And I'm also pretty active in the Brazilian community that acts here, both in the legal sense and also in the non-legal field, all general U of T alumni doing their undergrad work as well. So to kind of sum it up, yes, very much active and connected to the community, and love the food, love the people, and keep on doing that for sure.
Beautiful. Is there anything you miss the most? Is there something you can pinpoint that I miss the most in Brazil?
Ooh, it's funny because there's so many great, restaurants, and a lot of the food you can get here already. But maybe I will say, like, I miss, my mother's food, for example, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's one that's
Yeah.
really hard to replace anywhere in the world. And even when she visits, it's a little hard, to find the right seasonings, or to find,
So absolutely.
the precise things that she likes using. So it's been fun to kind of learn that throughout the journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I myself, one of the things I miss the most in Nigeria, miss the most about living in Nigeria, is the food. We have uh, we have things here. I mean, markets here, African markets where you can get stuff, but it's not just the same as the home cooked. Yeah, but that's it. Yeah, that's beautiful to hear. Any further reflections, Claudio, on your journey so far? Like looking back on your journey, is there anything that you would have changed in the way it progressed? Yeah, anything to share with us?
I don't think so. I meet with people frequently because I have this interesting paying back to people who are first starting their journeys here. And honestly, I don't think I have any regrets. As I had mentioned, something that I was afforded the opportunity to do was to kind of take that time, after coming here, going back home, and continuing my career as I had planned already. Right, Canada was never supposed to be the long-term plan at that point, so I was able to come and enjoy the experience without worrying too much. But also, once I learned about the possibility, and evaluated and decided it, I made sure that I was very well informed of what the experience would be like, how the process would work to requalify, all the way from, the formal requirements to, the other not so formal written requirements, in the sense of finding an articling job and all of those other points. So I definitely feel a little bit of a sense of pride and joy on having had that opportunity to really uh, have the time to understand the process, and really research it out, and make sure that it was also something that I wanted for myself and that made sense in my career. I think all of those things really, made sense for me. And as a final reflection, maybe for other people who are listening to the podcast, who are maybe interested in this journey, I would say, it's an incredible one. There's lots of steps, and of course, depending on the stage of life you are, it can be different, right? The challenges, or the difficulties, or the things that are easier for you now or not, they're different for each person. But it's been incredibly rewarding, and this is something interesting about this profession. Sometimes generally we like to say things about, lawyers are slow to adapt to technology, lawyers are this or that. But I found more and more as I do the podcast that it's not really fair to, paint everyone with a brush. If you have a bad experience at one workplace, there's always another place that can, really be very, very different. And there's so many lawyers working on building different practices and building new ways to practice law. So I would say that, it's a rewarding career, it's a rewarding path, and I'm so excited for what's ahead.
Same here, absolutely. Thank you. That was very good wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing out of your stories, your journey. The thing about sharing this podcast and even just studying law around the world is people behind us coming and I remember way back when we just came in, it was pretty dark because we didn't have much people talking about their journey or to people, lawyers are very busy. So to reach out and say, I just came into the country, people didn't really even really understand who are those foreign trained lawyers, because they don't know your story, they don't know your country, they don't know. But now with all this podcasts and blogs and associations, things are really, really getting better for the younger lawyers, even recruiters. Recruiters are watching this. I'm like, okay, now we're understanding this person was a lawyer in their country before, or they did criminal law in their country before. Now they're doing corporate law. Right? So I'm really grateful that you came to share your journey with me and with us eventually when I share this podcast out. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share, and I hope to stay in touch.
Same here. Thank you.